Hello and welcome to the latest edition of News for English Learners. As usual, we're going to read an article together and go over interesting vocabulary that we come across. Today's article is about Indonesia and about how there's been a recent increase in crocodile attacks of local residents. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to get more videos as I release them. So let's move on to the first paragraph. Indonesia has suffered about 1,000 crocodile attacks in the past decade, especially on Bangka Island. The island's tin mining industry has led to the depletion of its forests, pushing crocodiles into abandoned mining pits near residential areas. More than 60% of the island's land has been turned into tin mines, leaving behind thousands of pits that resemble a lunar landscape. This means that crocodiles are squeezed out of their homes and forced to live in abandoned pits close to people's houses, increasing the risk of human-crocodile conflicts. So if we look at the first word I have highlighted here in yellow, this is the verb lead, and it's often found with this preposition to. We can use this, or we sometimes find this as a noun when we hear the word leader. Usually we think of a person who's in charge of a group or a team of other people. For example, the boss at work is a leader because he's or she is the person who makes decisions for the group. They are responsible for the actions of the group. Another type of leader could be a political leader. Somebody who is a president or the mayor of a city is also a leader. Now, in this case, we're using the verb to lead. We often say in English, one thing leads to another. That is referring to this idea of causality. An action can sometimes cause another action. Think of dominoes. When you knock over a domino, the following domino is hit, and that causes another domino to be hit in turn. It's like a chain reaction. So in this case, what we are talking about is the actions of the mining industry leading to or causing the depletion of its forests. So that brings us on to the second word here, depletion. Now, the basic meaning of this is a noun, by the way, and the verb is to deplete, is to use up a limited supply of something, to cause it to diminish or to decrease. And eventually, of course, if it's limited, it will run out. It will disappear completely. Now, if we think about resources, the resources of the world, they have a limited supply. So we have a limited supply of oil, of gas, of minerals, and gradually we are consuming those. We are using them up. So those minerals or those natural resources are being depleted. Wood, which comes from trees, forests, is a good example of that, right? We cut down the trees, we use that wood in industry, and gradually those forests are depleted. They are disappearing. It's one of the big environmental problems in certain parts of the world. In this case, it's the mining industry that is cutting down the forests. It's depleting the forests in order to dig up the tin that is in the ground. And this is pushing the crocodiles out of their natural habitat. If we turn to the third word we have here, this is a phrasal verb, turn into. The basic meaning of this is about transformation. It's very similar to the verb to become. It's an irregular verb. Become, became, become. When we think about turning into something, we are basically thinking about change. A good example of this would be metamorphosis. Certain animals, particularly insects, if we think of the caterpillar, that metamorphoses. It turns into the butterfly. It consumes the leaves of plants. It creates a cocoon, and it transforms into a different form. the butterfly. Think of the story of the frog that is kissed by the princess and turns into a prince. So in this case, the land of the island is being transformed, it's being changed into tin mines by the companies that are extracting the tin from the ground. And that brings us on to the fourth word in this paragraph, because one of the consequences of this transformation is that the land is being dug up. Remember that irregular verb, dig, dug, dug. And when you dig a hole in the ground, in the land, you essentially leave behind a pit. So it's a kind of depression, and it's often associated with mining. When you dig a hole in the ground, you're creating a pit. Another use of this word pit is describing a part of the body. Where the arm connects to the body, underneath the shoulder, if you like, there is a kind of hollow or pit, and this is called the arm pit. So in this case, the land of the island is being transformed, being turned into a landscape that resembles the moon, right? Because on the moon there are lots of pits and craters, as they're often called. So moving on to the final word we have in this paragraph, that is another phrasal verb, to squeeze out, squeeze out. Now, if we look at the verb here, the basic verb, to squeeze, which is a regular verb, essentially means to apply pressure to something. If we think about making orange juice, how do you do that? Well, you've got to extract the juice from the orange. So you might cut the orange in half and apply pressure to it in order to squeeze out the juice from the orange. If we think about toothpaste, toothpaste usually comes in tubes. And in order to get the toothpaste onto the toothbrush, usually we have to squeeze it out. We apply pressure to the tube, and this forces out the paste onto the toothbrush. And that essentially is what is the meaning of this phrasal verb, to squeeze something out. It means to forcibly move it somewhere else. So in this case, the activities of the mining companies, digging the pits and depleting the forest, is forcibly moving the crocodiles out of their natural habitat and into contact with the local people. And this is the basic cause of this problem, this conflict. Okay, so let's move on to the next paragraph. The water was still, and there was no sign of a crocodile, so I decided to bathe. It appeared out of the blue and dragged me into the water, says Saria, a 54-year-old woman who was bitten by a 3-meter-long crocodile when she went to fetch water from a pit near her home. She managed to escape by hitting the crocodile with her bucket, but suffered severe injuries on her arm. Crocodiles are a protected species in Indonesia, but in Bangka Island they are usually killed after an attack rather than being handed over to a local conservation agency. So the first word we have up here at the top is still. Now this word you may have come across in a totally different way, because it's very often used as an adverb when we are making sentences using, for example, the present continuous or the present perfect tense. And the basic meaning of that adverb is that a situation or an action is continuing. So if I said, I'm still living in the house where I was born, that means that I'm continuing to live there, right? I was born in that house and I've continued to live there until today. We also use it, however, as an adjective. And in this case, it has a totally different meaning. When we say that something is still, it means that it's not moving. It's, for example, if we think of water, when you order water in a restaurant to drink, You can have it with or without bubbles. In Britain, we often call with bubbles, we call it sparkling water. But if you don't like the gas, the bubbles in the water, you can ask for still water. So there's no movement in that water. There are no bubbles. It's completely still. And equally, if we think about nature, there are rivers and there are oceans which are in constant movement. But sometimes, on a very quiet day without wind, a lake or a body of water will be still. It will not move. If we look at the image over here, we can see an example of this. It's totally flat. The water was still. There was no movement. And in this case, there was unfortunately a crocodile hiding in that water, completely still, without any movement, until this woman decided to enter the water. And then it attacked. It appeared out of the blue. So that brings us to this idiom here, out of the blue. It's a very common idiom, and we often use it in situations where things happen unexpectedly, suddenly, without warning. Imagine you're walking down the street and something falls from the sky directly in front of you. Obviously, you'd be very surprised because you wouldn't be expecting that to happen. So that is the idea here. Something's falling from the sky. It's coming out of the blue without any warning. In this case, it was the attack of the crocodile. The crocodile was hiding and then suddenly it attacked her and it dragged her into the water. So that brings us to this regular verb, to drag. Now, the basic meaning of this is to apply force to something and to pull it behind you across the ground. Think of dragging a heavy suitcase through the airport, or perhaps dragging heavy furniture if you're changing the position of the furniture in your house, or fishing boats that often drag large nets behind them in order to catch fish, right? They're pulling that net behind them through the water. Of course, like most words, it does have other uses. You can talk about dragging somebody. For example, if I drag somebody to a party, that means that they are very reluctant to go. They're not very keen. They don't want to go, but I drag them there. I pull them with me. Maybe not literally, but I persuade them to come with me. We also talk about things dragging on and on when they are proceeding at a very slow and tedious pace. Perhaps you are attending a conference and the speaker is not being very interesting and it seems to be taking forever. So you would say his speech dragged on. So moving on to the next word, we have the regular verb fetch. And this is very similar to another verb, bring, which is irregular, bring, brought, brought. Now, probably the easiest example I can give you of what this means is thinking of a dog, because many people have dogs. And if you have a dog, or if you've seen a dog in the park, you'll often see the owner throwing a ball or a stick perhaps, and expecting the dog to run away, pick up that ball, that object, and bring it back. That is fetch. That's what it's doing. It's fetching the ball or fetching the stick. So it's when you go to a particular place, you pick something up and you bring it back to that location. So if we are both in the living room and I would like you to go and get me a coffee from the kitchen, I might say, can you fetch me a coffee? So you go to the kitchen, you pick up the coffee and you bring it back. Whereas if you are already in the kitchen, instead of fetch, I would use bring. I would say, please bring me that coffee. So fetch is always a two-way process. You go, you pick it up, and you come back. So let's move on to the next and final paragraph. One of the main issues is the lack of awareness and education among local communities about how to get on with crocodiles. Many people are unaware of the risks. The Indonesian government allows miners to obtain a license to work in the illegal mines, but in exchange, they have to look after habitat restoration. But many are skeptical about the strategy, wondering if miners will actually make any effort to restore the environment. Weak law enforcement on the island means they are likely to get away with it either way. So the first word we have here is another phrasal verb. It's get on with. This is often used when we are talking about relationships. So if you have a good relationship with somebody, we would often say you get on with them. Now, you should also be aware that you might hear get along with instead of get on with, but it has exactly the same meaning. And equally, if you have a bad relationship with someone, you would say, I don't get on with them. So if my neighbor is constantly annoying me, making noise, and doing things that really get on my nerves, I would probably say that I don't get on with them. If my boss is very harsh, very unfair with me, and doesn't communicate very well, I would say that I don't get on with him. We do not have a good relationship. Sometimes siblings, brothers and sisters, do not get on with each other. I didn't really get on with my sister when we were younger. We often fought and argued, but now we've grown older and we've changed as people, and we get on very well. So another use that you should be aware of this, the same phrasal verb but with a different meaning, is to get on with something rather than somebody. If I say to you, get on with it, what I'm saying is do it. Continue with what you are doing. Get it finished. So you will often hear, for example, teachers saying this in the classroom. If the students are not doing their work, they're not doing what they should be doing, the teacher might say, please stop talking and get on with your work. I could say, for example, I have to get on with my homework in order to finish it before the deadline. So I need to do it. I need to take action. Okay, so let's move on to the next word. We have yet another phrasal verb. This one is two-part phrasal verb, but like the previous one, it is inseparable. So the noun always goes after the particle. In this case, we are using the phrasal verb look after in a similar way that we might use the verb care. Because when you're looking after somebody or something, you are essentially taking care of it. If we think of a pet, like a dog or a cat or a baby, you provide food for that. You give them shelter and generally take care of all of their needs, all of their necessities. So that is the situation in which we use this verb. You look after it. Now, in this case, in the article, it's not talking about looking after an animal or a baby. It's saying that in exchange for being allowed to mine, the miners are supposed to look after the habitat. So they are supposed to, for example, plant trees or take care of the waste that they produce. They are supposed to take actions to care for the environment. But many people are skeptical about this, as it says in the following sentence. And many people wonder, or they are wondering, if the miners will actually do this, rather than just saying it. So that brings us on to this verb, to wonder. Now, this is a homophone. In other words, there are two words that sound the same, but they have completely different meanings. This one here, with an O, is essentially about thinking. It's a thought process. When we wonder, we are thinking, we are pondering, we are questioning, asking ourselves what would happen or what might happen. If I said, I wonder what the weather will be like tomorrow, that means that I don't know, but I am thinking about it and trying to maybe to guess what will happen. We also use the base of this word to make the adjective wonderful, which you probably come across at some point. That means that something is very positive. If I've had a wonderful time, a wonderful holiday, it means I've really enjoyed that holiday. But going back to the verb to wonder, as I said, it is a homophone. Now, the other word, which sounds the same, is also pronounced wonder, but it's spelt with an A. So it's W-A-N-D-E-R. And this one is nothing to do with thinking. This wonder is to do with movement. If you wander around, you're essentially moving, not in a direct way. So you're not going from A to B. You're just moving generally around. I like, for example, when I go to visit a new city, I like often to just wander around, to walk around the streets and to look around and see what I can find. Other people perhaps like to make a plan and they like to go from A to B to C and visit all of the sites. Depends on your preference, of course. So to wander with an A is basically to move around. To wander with an O is basically to think about something. So let's move on to the final word. And again, we have yet another phrasal verb, to get away with. Three-part phrasal verbs, and like all of them, it is inseparable. So you get away with something. The meaning of this is to escape consequence. So it usually means you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, or perhaps something that is even illegal. Think of cheating in an exam. Okay, you shouldn't be cheating, but sometimes people do it. Now, there are two possible outcomes. Either you get caught, the teacher sees you, and you suffer the consequences, or you don't get caught. You cheat and you pass the exam. In this case, in the second case, we would say you got away with cheating. You managed to cheat and you didn't face the negative consequences. Equally, if you commit a crime, the police will sometimes investigate it if it's a serious crime, and they will either catch you or not. If they don't catch you, you got away with that crime. So in this case, it's saying that because the law enforcement on the island is not very strong, in fact, it's weak, it is very probable, it is likely that the miners will get away with not looking after the environment because they're not going to suffer the consequences, so they won't do it. So that brings us to the end of today's video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have learned some new vocabulary. Don't forget to subscribe if you have, and I'll see you in the next one.